He said the whole Cuban venture is a failure. Everything is lost. This is the worst day of my life. I had never seen him look down before. He used a string of four-letter words that he didn't learn at Harvard, unless he went there in the 60s. He might have learned it then. I realized that this is the first time he had ever failed. He had never been through the fire of failure before.
What was your meeting with President Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs like?
Well, the way it happened was that he called me on the phone, and I was in Washington briefly to get a CIA briefing prior to some travel. And he asked me if I could come down to see him. And I said, of course I would come, and we set the appointment for the next day. I should set the background for that, however. When I arrived in Washington, I arrived the day that the Bay of Pigs story began to break in the papers. I had an appointment that evening with Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA. He was going to brief me on foreign policy generally. The Washington Star reported that the landing had taken place. I assumed it had gone all right because I knew that it had been planned in the Eisner administration. I just assumed this was the one that was being carried forward by Kennedy.
After you left office, you had no knowledge of its being carried forward, though.
No, but I assumed it would be because it was well on its way by the time Kennedy became president. Then when Kennedy reappointed Allen Dulles as head of the CIA, I assumed that Dulles would continue to push for carrying out the particular plan. I'll never forget when Dulles came to the door. I opened the door and I shook hands and I said, come on in, Allen. I said, would you like a drink? He says, I would. He says, I really need one. I said, well, what's happened? He said, the whole Cuban venture is a failure. Everything is lost. This is the worst day of my life. And then he gave me chapter and verses what had happened. He said, the greatest mistake I ever made in my life was not tell the president that if he went in, that there was a chance it might fail and that he must not lose. Because what had happened, as Allen Dulles explained it, is that Kennedy had canceled 2 airstrikes, which were essential if it were going to have any chance to succeed. Canceled the strikes because he was concerned about the reaction he was getting from within his own administration, particularly people like Adlai Stevenson in opposition to what was being done. So I had that background before going in. So I went to the White House, and Lyndon Johnson was in the office at the time, and we shook hands, had a little idle chatter, and then we sat down. Kennedy in his rocking chair, I sitting over on a couch, and he proceeded to fill me in.
How did he look?
Beaten, very wan, very tired, harassed. I had never seen him look down before, never. But in this case, it was not surprising that he would look that way. And I felt incidentally complimented a bit that he felt that he could let his hair down, and he really did. He was, I may say, quite outspoken in condemning all of the people that advised him, the CIA, the military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of those that advised him. He says, I asked every one of the sons of about this. They all assured me it would succeed. And then he got up and started to pace the floor. He used a string of 4-letter words that he didn't learn at Harvard, unless he went there in the 60s. He might have learned it then. But in any event, I felt that it was good that he had a chance to vent his frustration and his anger on this occasion. And he said to me, and incidentally, this tells us something about his past as well. He said that it had been the worst experience in his life to have to talk to some of those men that had been part of the invasion force, their families and so forth. He said it was the worst day of his life, his feeling that he had let them down. And as he told me that, I realized that this is the first time he had ever failed. He had never been through the fire of failure before. And And that's why it had such an enormous impact on him.
Why did he want to meet with you? Did he ask for your support?
Oh, of course, that was the purpose of it. Yes, he hadn't had me down before, no reason to it particularly, but in this instance he wanted the support of the Republicans for what he was not going to do, which was nothing at that particular point.
Did he ask for your advice, or did you offer advice on what you thought he should do?
Yes, I said that he suggested he would be interested in advice, and I said there's no question about what ought to be done. He said, you've got to get Castro out of there. I said I would find a legal excuse, maybe defending our base at Guantanamo, or saving the lives of American citizens who happen to be residing and are living in Cuba, to go in and take him out. And his answer was, well, he couldn't risk that because he had heard from Chip Bolin and other experts that Khrushchev was in a very cocky mood, and that if he moved in on Cuba, that Khrushchev might move on Berlin. So we kind of left that there. I then pledged my support, in addition, if he decided to do something in Laos, because his first speech after he became president had been with regard to the communist attempts to take over Laos. And you remember, he had said in his inaugural, we will fight any time, any place, in defense of freedom. And Laos had been used as an example of where the United States might fight. And then I was really shocked to hear him say, no, we can't do anything in Laos. If we can't do something about Cuba, 90 miles away, I don't think the American people will support doing something in Laos where we might be confronted with 1 million Chinese. Of course, later on, it was he who made the decision to send the first 15,000 Americans into Vietnam. But that, of course, is another part of the story. So under the circumstances, the conversation went on.
Did you try to talk him around to your point of view?
As well as I could. I felt that I had to put it into the hopper. He has a very quick mind. You don't need to try to arm twist him or that sort of thing. And anyway, it would have been improper for me to do so.